folks, so it's time for us to start looking at how we use Git within the context of the project that we're busy creating. Up until now, we've been using sort of functionalities that are around the edges of Git, in the sense of using its bash interface to pass Linux commands to our window machine like that, and we've used its clone facility to be able to pull a repo from the web. But we haven't actually used Git for what its true intended purpose is, that obviously being of source control. So let's take a look at how we can set up a Git repository, and let's take a look at the basic interaction with that repository. And very specifically, let's take a look at the implication of the .gitignore file and how that works within the Laravel context, and how we can commit changes. And it's a really very basic introduction to using Git. This lesson is not intended by any means to be the Uber lesson as far as using Git goes. Git is a very, very deep and powerful application, and quite frankly, most of the guys that I know probably don't even use a fraction of its capabilities. The one thing I will say about Git is that if you've used something like Subversion or SVN or some other version control system, then Git can be a bit of a leap in terms of understanding how it works, because it works completely different to how any of those traditional version control systems work. Git works on the basis of a directory level approach, and it also takes a view that, I suppose the simplest way to explain it is that every time you do a commit, Git is taking a complete snapshot of your environment based on how you've set it up. And that's probably the easiest way to think about it. So let's dig around here and let's use Git. Let's set up a repo and let's do some things. So the first thing we have to understand is that Git, as I've mentioned, operates on a directory level basis. So we want to be in the project directory of our project that we're working with. So let's go there. Okay, so we're in the root directory of our project, and actually it's probably going to be beneficial if I do something like this and bring this up on the side here so we can see what it's doing. Let's go into our code directory. Okay, so now we need to obviously initialize Git, because if we do a git status at this level, it will tell us there is no repository in the directory that we're working. So let me now show you the really convoluted process in terms of getting a Git repo up and going. And there we go. It's done. We've got our Git repository up and running. If we have a look over here, you can see it's created a .git. Let me just refresh this. There you can see at the top it's created a .git directory, and if you go in there, that's the Git internals. That's how it manages itself. You don't ever worry about doing stuff in here, but the commands that you issue via the Git window or the bash window affects what happens here, obviously. Okay. So let's do some quick prep work and let's play around with this gitignore file so we can really drill home what that means. So the first thing I want to do is I want to copy the existing .gitignore to a file called .gitignore.actual. So now we know that .actual file, that is our true original gitignore file, which means we can make changes to that one, to our heart's content, by knowing we've got a backup. Okay, and let's do something else. Let's do a listing, but let's pipe it to a file. Okay, let's open that file quickly, and let's grab ourselves a quick directory listing here. I'm using the Alt functionality within Notepad, and I'm just grabbing a quick directory listing. And what I want to do now is I'm going to grab every entry that's sitting in this directory, and I'm going to edit this gitignore, and I'm going to dump all of those entries in there. You will notice I've left out the .z file, so let's save that, close that down. Okay, so we have this .gitignore file. Now we've created our repository, so the first thing that we have to do is we have to add our project files to that repository, and the command is git add, and we can just add everything. Okay, now if we do a git status, it'll show us what files it's tracking that it's going to push into the repository when we do a commit. And it's only showing us one file, that .z file. And that's the purpose of the gitignore file. Because we've listed in the gitignore file everything that's sitting in our project except that z file, Git says, well, I'm being told I must ignore all of these. So it ignores them. Okay. So now that we know that that is the file that we're going to commit, we can now issue the commit command. And the commit is very simple. It's git commit space m, space minus m with a message, and we can just give it some arb message. We're going to come back and redo this in a second. Okay, and if we do a git status now, again, everything's clean. So that's a basic workflow. Alright, now let's roll everything back and get to our actual true state, and then we'll take a look at sort of a proper simulated workflow. Okay. So the first thing that we got to do is let's remove that repo. And that's it. Our Git repository is gone. It's as simple as that. We can now delete that file, and we can delete that file, and we can move our .gitignore .actual back to .gitignore. Okay, so we're essentially back to a vanilla state. If we now say git init, we create our repository, we say git add everything. If we do a git status now, it shows us everything in green that it's going to commit. And if we now commit this, git commit minus m, we can say Laravel install. If we now do a status again, it's all clean. So that's how Git handles itself from the command line. There are loads of graphical user interfaces. I tend to steer clear of them because they can be so confusing. Git has enormous amount of functionality, but once you know the real basic commands from a command line perspective, it literally becomes a breeze working with Git, because you write your code, you get to a milestone, you add the files, you commit them, and Git manages everything in the background for you. There's one other thing I can show you if you wanted to add a very long message as part of the commit. So let's just create a file in that directory, touch temp.txt. Okay, git add everything. Alright, git status. It shows us it's only got the temp file that it's got to commit, but now I want a really long message with this. So I can say git commit, but I leave out the message flag. It will automatically open In my case it's Vim, but it will automatically open the editor that you've associated with your Git installation. So I can insert and I can say Laravel second commit of some file as an example, and I'm going to hash these out to simulate a long message. And now I can escape write quit, and that's it, it's committed. If we do a status again now, everything's clean. So that's Git in a nutshell. As I said, this is not intended to be an extremely deep lesson on the functionality of Git. The purpose is really just to show you how that gitignore file works, how to set up a repo, how to do basic check-in, how to clean the repo if you want to just create a new one, and also to show you that straight out from a base install, Laravel is correctly set up to handle the Laravel environment. So you literally don't actually have to even worry about this. When you do a clean install like this, it's already pre-set up and everything is ready to go. Okay, so that's a very basic lesson on Git. Next we're going to get into something really cool. We're going to have some fun with Composer. So I'll see you in the next lesson.